Moving to a new job can be very stressful. So I have made an orientation video, especially for you newcomers.
Hello, new worker. Congratulations on being hired. Before you begin your career at this particular corporation, you need to learn some key facts and helpful tips about being an office worker. In fact, this orientation may help you in any line of work. What brought you here today? Well, you had a choice: wage labor or starving to death. There is no real choice, which makes our current economic system compulsory.
You say we're the same, but we get compensated very differently.
Yes.
We work the same hours as you, and you just said we work a lot harder.
You do?
One day when most of the world is ready for a revolution, that may change, but since that appears to be a long ways off, you need to prepare yourself for your career and how best to interact with your employer. Everything your employer does is in service of controlling you. Even if they don't think of it that way, that's what's happening all the time. If your employer is a manager and not an owner, they still have an implicit mandate from said owner to control you. Example: ever wonder why big corporations are against universal health care even though it costs those corporations to pay for your employee health care? It's because that's a bargaining chip they have to make you continue to work there for whatever they choose to pay you. It's all about control. Surviving your job is about escaping that control. To that end, here are some tips that you might find useful. Tip number 1. Seeing through your employer's bull. In order to maintain control over you, sometimes your employer may gently or not so gently remind you about a concept called time theft, something they invented that definitely does not actually exist. Employers sometimes describe time theft with examples like incorrectly clocking in, but really, time theft to them is the act of you doing anything besides labor for your shift. Keep in mind that shifts can last from 8 hours to 12 hours, or perhaps more. Taking a minute to break or briefly checking your phone for messages from your family are unacceptable to your employer, because that time could have been spent serving said employer. The truth is that working non-stop without breaks or time to stretch your legs is extremely dangerous both psychologically and physically. You are a human being and not a machine, and as such you require moments of rest and relaxation, even in the workplace. In fact, especially in the workplace. Never taking a moment to go to the water cooler or talk to a nearby coworker in the next cubicle, day in and day out over the course of years, can cause psychological harm. Employers call it time theft because it places the responsibility on you and frames the act of being a human being as a moral failing.
Ethics is a real discussion of competing conceptions of the good. This is just the corporate anti-shoplifting rules.
Corporations push statistics that show how much they lost due to time theft, but really those statistics show how much more they could have gotten if they worked their employees even harder and treated them not like human beings. Yes, the blame is on you for daring to call your loved ones about something important. In truth, time theft does not make sense, for multiple reasons. First, if you are able to complete your tasks in the workday while also behaving like a human being and having a snack, then nothing has been taken from the employer. Time theft, as a concept, is particularly strange if your occupation does not depend on deadlines and instead is done through a per-customer basis. Meet Jim. He spends time talking to his wife at work, but since he's one of the top salesmen and having this psychological outlet helps his productivity and morale, his employer should not care.
My wife works here, and I love it. She literally makes me work harder, she makes me smarter, she makes me remember why I'm here.
See, employers institute time theft rules and reminders because what they really want is for the workers to work harder than they have to. Harder than they are paid to work. More hours than they are paid to work. More time than they are paid to work. By framing the act of talking to a coworker to alleviate some of the mounting stress of the workday as time theft, employers can guilt and punish their workers for not working what is essentially overtime for no added pay. Here is a quote from an employer's guide from a software website trying to sell employers on the idea that time theft is real.
To eliminate time theft, it is essential to create a work environment with the resources to monitor and prevent it. Investing in the right software will take care of many of the administrative issues that contribute to letting time theft slide by.
Haha, well, by resources to monitor and prevent, and investing in the right software, this fucking narc is actually saying that you taking a smoke break or 5 minutes too long on your lunch is all the justification they need to spy on you. This includes cameras and spy software in office computers to monitor you as if you were a prisoner. An Orwellian nightmare that has become so commonplace that its normalcy has led to complacency about fighting back against this.
I don't care if you are gay or straight or a lesbian or overweight. Just get in here right now.
Employers don't institute time theft policies and punishments out of a moral responsibility, of course. Employers do this to squeeze as much labor, often free labor, out of their employees as they legally can. If an employer demands that a worker perform their labor more and or harder than they are paid to do so, that labor is therefore free. It is actually the employer who is the thief. This is called wage theft, which is actually a thing. Workers sell their labor to employers for a set amount of time in exchange for wages. A fraction of the value of what the workers produce comes back to them in the form of a wage. The rest is kept, or stolen, by the owners of the corporation who generally do no productive labor themselves. This is called wage slavery, and it's how the world works. Kind of. They can get away with this because under capitalism, this sort of theft is both perfectly legal and encouraged. Illegal forms of wage theft include failure to pay overtime or failure to pay minimum wage, but these laws are often circumvented with little to no consequences by corporations. Remember, someone who bakes a loaf of bread so that they may buy a slice of bread is not free. If you're wondering which is worse, time theft or wage theft, it can be solved by reminding yourself who has significantly more power. Enforcing an atmosphere in which time theft is somehow a thing, workers will become even more stressed about their work. You could mistreat your own psychological well-being and actually become less productive, the opposite of the intention of time theft enforcement. To combat this, develop a friendship with someone in your workplace. Someone who can cover for you if you're stuck in an elevator or in traffic. Employers hate it if you have a friend at work. Having a friend at work also means you have someone who can alert you if your employer is making their rounds like a beat cop and hoping to dock your pay for glancing at your phone in case your sick child needs to text you. Remember, solidarity is everything. Tip number 2, stay off the grid. Your employer is tracking you at all times. It will never be enough for them that you do your job. What they really want is for you to do more than you are paid to do so that they can wring free labor out of you like a wet washcloth. Take precautions. First, don't use your corporate email address. If your employer insists on you using it and expects to see you using it, only use it to communicate directly with your employer to give them that impression. If you want to communicate with your coworkers or loved ones while at work, use your private email address, but never on your office computer. They can and will track that with email surveillance. Use your own phone, and just in case, never use the corporate Wi-Fi. Use your network. Communicating with your coworkers privately is necessary to safeguard yourself from any unfair practices from your employer. If you're being monitored, you aren't able to do this, and your employer knows this. That's why the email surveillance software is there to begin with. Any area in which your employer does not have control over you is unacceptable to them, so it's best to try to get around this. Employers will tell you that computers are company property and that their surveillance is well within their rights because they own the computers. Then, in the same breath, they will tell you not to email your coworkers on your phones to avoid their surveillance even though the phones are your property. This isn't about use or misuse of company property. It's about control. Tip number 3. Learn your employer's behavior. While every employer follows some of the same tactics, each employer has a different way of tricking you into performing free labor for them. If your employer tells you that they have a development opportunity for you, that translates into an added project that is not part of your work schedule, nor is it one of your duties. Your employer is hoping to trick you into performing a new task that is not a requirement of your job to squeeze more labor out of you. Respond by saying that performing this task will take away time and effort from your current tasks, the things that are actually your job. If your employer insists, remind them that your current tasks will suffer and that you cannot be held responsible if this happens under orders from the employer. If the employer then responds that you must do this new task in addition to your current tasks at the same level of efficiency, remind them that this will cause you to have to work overtime and for extra pay. If they double down and deny you that pay, tell your employer that you will have to speak to payroll and whoever is above your employer on the corporate ladder. Unless your employer is the sole owner of the company, there will always be someone higher up. That doesn't mean that someone higher up will be sympathetic to you. Heavens no. It only means that whoever is higher up will believe your immediate supervisor is losing control, and they love control, so your immediate supervisor doesn't want you to make that call. Employers will try to convince you that you are a professional and therefore expected to put in longer hours. Even if you're just punching the keyboard, your employer will pretend that the work is extremely important. If you're a salaried worker and you took the job under the impression that you would work 40 hours a week, your employer is trying to get you to work an extra 20 hours a week, because that would be like increasing their staff by 50% without costing the corporation a penny. Tip number 4. Always look for something better. Employers want to keep you in a state of fear of losing your job. When they try to make you work longer hours for no added pay, or harder for no added pay, they are hoping that you won't quit your job for something better. Employers will remind workers of the bad economy, which always exists in the minds of employers regardless of which year we're in. For that reason, always look at other job opportunities comparable to your own. That way, should your employer tell you that you wouldn't want to lose your job because it's hard out there, you can respond by having a pre-made list of jobs to which you qualify and could easily apply. Your employer needs you more than you need your employer. Your employer is stuck where they are and is answerable to corporate if you have a loss in labor. You do not answer to corporate if you no longer work there. When you quit, your responsibilities are over, and they know this. Tip number 5. Get that bread. After working for your employer and accepting their indignities for a few years, you are entitled to an increase in pay. Employers generally have the power to do this, but will try to avoid it at all costs. They would rather keep as much of the yearly salary increase for themselves. Employers will pretend their hands are tied and cite vague rules, like salary guidelines or pressure from corporate, to avoid this. An employer will try to be good cop and place the blame on a bad cop, probably someone above them in the corporate ladder who almost never makes an appearance at the workplace, and is therefore unable to confirm this. Here's an idea. Actually ask for specifics. Do so politely at first, under the guise of your professionalism. You want to understand the situation more clearly so that you can be a more productive worker after all. Human resources might be able to help you from time to time, but most likely they will be useless. HR does not work for you. HR works for corporate. HR exists to protect the corporation from lawsuits and other problems associated with employees. HR is actually not on your side.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
Tip number 6. Cover your butt. This is a quick one, but very important. Document everything that protects yourself. Documenting your successes is useful for when your employer insists that you have not been doing your job. It's also useful when asking for a raise or a promotion. Try to build strong relationships with those inside and outside your department so that if your employer comes down hard on you for something that isn't your fault, you have both the documentation and backup to fight this accusation. Tip number 7. Beware bootlickers. Now, some middle managers may sympathize with your station due to earning a comparable wage, but some people of a similar economic class as yourself will choose to have no real solidarity with you and instead serve higher authorities. Meet Dwight. He informs his immediate superior, Michael, about any suspected infractions by his coworkers. He also routinely sides with Michael over his coworkers and sometimes even goes over Michael's head to speak to corporate. Unfortunately, Dwight is no anomaly. He's part of a pattern of behavior common to the workplace. These bootlickers are called class traitors. Members of the working class who directly or indirectly work against their own class interests. The most notable example is the police, who make a middle-class wage at best but serve the interests of capitalism by controlling the poor. You don't have to feel bad for standing up to them just because they're not rich, since they serve the ruling class more than they serve you. Class traitors often have ambitions beyond their station, and rather than pulling everyone together to make a better life for the exploited workers, class traitors seek to be the ones in charge of the exploitation. Tip number 8. Avoid manipulation. An important thing to remember is that the corporation does not care about you. The corporation did not hire you as a favor. Hiring you is an agreement, an exchange of labor for pay. The corporation did not do you a favor by hiring you, it simply wanted to exploit your labor. Some employers don't want you to realize this. A manipulative employer will constantly remind you of how they helped you in the past by hiring you. Again, that's not what happened. They wanted you to perform labor for the corporation, and you were willing to do so. That's all that happened. On occasion, your hiring may have had something to do with a friend going out on a limb for you, sure, but 9 times out of 10, your hiring was impersonal and had to do with the corporation wanting the most productive worker for the least amount of pay. If your employer ever tries to guilt you into doing something you don't have to do, remind them of this fact. They will undoubtedly call you ungrateful, to which you can reply that your employer is actually ungrateful for your already hard work if they are pushing you to commit to more work than you were hired to do. Employers don't want you to think of it that way. They only want you to think of the relationship between employer and employee as that of a parent and child, respectively. You were hired to do a job. If your employer wants you to do a new job, only tangentially related to your current one, then your employer must, in effect, hire you again for this new occupation. And in the hiring process, there must be talk of compensation.
Yummy, thank you. Ryan.
What was the thing you needed me to come in early for?
The sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit.
Employers want you to be dependent on them, not independent, as a matter of control. They don't want you to be richer than they are because that would mean losing said control. The corporation wants you to be of a low economic class to better control you. Tip number 9. Discuss comparative pay. There is a good chance that some of your coworkers who perform the same job as yourself and started at a similar time make more money than you. This is because compensation is not equal across the board. Don't blame them though. You are paid only as much as your employer believes they can get away with paying you. If you work a minimum wage job, chances are everyone else makes the same. But if you work anywhere else, there is probably some disparity based on how much hardball one worker played compared to another, and sometimes other factors like gender, cronyism, and more. Employers don't want you to discuss your wages with other workers because then you might ask to be paid the same as everyone else in your department. Corporations and society at large propagate the idea that discussing your wages is vulgar and in bad taste. And maybe among strangers that's true, but among coworkers there is solidarity in discussing comparative wages. If wages are secret, employers can get away with paying some people less than what they deserve. Finally, tip number 10. Join a union. If your occupation or workplace does not have a union, speak to union leaders in your area about forming one. During orientation, there is a good chance that your employer will either play anti-union propaganda for you or subtly suggest in conversation about why a union would be bad for you. A union is incredibly good for your bargaining power and safety. The only reason a union might be bad for you is that if your employer catches wind of you starting a union, they will fire you. A union is only bad because of your employer punishing you for even considering being in one. Union organizing should be done quietly, because if your employer finds out, they will send someone in to threaten the jobs of everyone considering unionizing. Actually being in one is very helpful. Union workers generally enjoy better wages than non-union workers because unions can negotiate these wages. Remember literally every unfair practice by your employer said earlier? Those can be mitigated with collective bargaining. Again, the problem is not the union. The problem is the employer blocking the union. A union takes away some of the control from the employer, and at the risk of being repetitive, that's what this is all about. Control. Well, new worker, that about wraps it up. We hope you're ready for an exciting new career and lifestyle in which you are willing to question the authority of someone who just happened to have started working at the company earlier than yourself. Good luck to you, and as always, death to capitalism.
I'll be taking you through the Blockbuster Customer Service Program. In the last few years, the retail business has become increasingly competitive. More and more retailers have been struggling just to stay alive. The survivors follow a simple formula: listening to their customers and meeting their expectations. That's not a formula for success. That's a formula for survival.